I said I was done after the funeral, Nathan Cole muttered, staring at his phone. So who put my wife's name on my calendar for Friday at 7 p.m.? The words tasted like iron. Her name, Evelyn Cole, glowed in blue, as if a living person had just booked a conference room. Before we continue, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe for more emotional stories like this one. Nathan stood alone in his glass-walled office on the 28th floor. The Seattle sky poured ash over the city, and Elliott Bay looked like it was holding its breath. The building he'd built from a garage startup into a billion-dollar logistics empire hummed beneath him, elevators whispering, printers coughing, phones ringing for futures he no longer wanted. It had been 6 weeks since they lowered Evelyn into the earth on a rain-hushed morning, and Nathan had shut a door inside himself so thoroughly he swore he'd misplaced the key. The calendar entry pulsed, almost taunting. Title, Final Review. Location, Green Lake Boathouse. Notes, Arrive alone. Wear the coat I love. No one had access to his private calendar except his executive assistant, Mara Jimenez. Not even IT could sneak in without her noise and his approval. He pressed the intercom. "Mara, in here." She entered with quiet efficiency, her dark hair twisted up in a practical knot, eyes soft with the sort of care that can feel like trespass. "What's wrong?" He turned the monitor. She leaned in, and her breath hitched. "Nathan, I didn't put that there. Who else could? She's—" He swallowed. The word dead refused to cooperate. Mara straightened, analytic calm reassembling her features. "We migrated your accounts last month. It's possible Evelyn had scheduled a delayed invite before she paused, voice careful. She knew your habits. She managed your time as fiercely as you guard it." Nathan closed his eyes. He could see Evelyn's handwriting in his mind. Ink confident and looping, grocery lists that became menus, menus that became laughter. She'd always loved the boathouse at Green Lake, where college kids rented rowboats and old men taught themselves patience with fishing lines. He and Evelyn used to walk there on late summer evenings, the ordinary shimmering like it mattered. "I don't want a ghost," he said. "You might want a goodbye you actually heard," Mara replied, surprising herself, her cheeks colored. "I'm sorry, that was out of line." Nathan waved it off. Since the funeral, people either knelt at the altar of his grief or sprinted around it as though it were a sinkhole. He preferred the sprinting. It was cleaner. But Mara had always been unafraid of the mess. "Check the logs," he said. "If this is a glitch, I'll delete it. And if it's not, then it's still none of my business." He tried to return to contracts and forecasts, but his gaze drifted to the boathouse appointment until the blue rectangle blurred. Down in the lobby, a florist was replacing lilies that had wilted in a day. He hated lilies now. They smelled like the last room he left Evelyn in. By late afternoon, Mara slipped back in with a printed sheet. I traced the origin. The invite came from a delayed email triggered by a rule labeled, "For Nathan, only if I don't make it." Time-stamped 8 months ago. It was set to send 6 weeks after the funeral. She placed the paper on his desk with reverence. "I think she scheduled it herself, Nathan." He stared at the proof until it stopped being data and started being a woman he loved. Evelyn penciling her future into his. "What does she want me to review?" "There's an attachment, password protected. The hint says, 'Our first boat's name.'" Nathan looked up, the smallest ghost of a smile touching the corner of his mouth. "She named it June Bug because we bought it in June and it kept attracting beetles." "I'll step out," Mara said, retreating toward the door. "Text me if you need anything." When she was gone, he typed in the password. A document bloomed, not a spreadsheet, but a letter. The first lines blurred, then sharpened. Nathan, if you're reading this, I'm somewhere you can't follow yet. I know you closed the door. I know you think it protects you. But love has always had a spare key. Meet me at Green Lake on Friday, our old table by the boathouse. There will be someone waiting. Please don't let anger speak for you. Let the water do the talking first. His heart thudded. Someone waiting. Evelyn was planning meetings from a place the living didn't understand. He wanted to refuse on principle, on pain. He wanted to say that grief was a private property with no trespassing signs nailed to every fence post. But then he thought of Evelyn's laugh when he pretended he didn't know how to row and spun them in circles, the way she'd say, "Stop performing and just be with me, Nate." The invitation wasn't to a haunt. It was to a memory still insisting on its right to live. He took the elevator down, stepping into a lobby of airy stone and wet umbrellas. The portrait of Evelyn near the reception desk, a charity gala shot where her silver dress caught the flash like morning, stopped him. A small placard beneath it read, "The Evelyn Cole Foundation for Foster Youth, launching soon." He'd promised her. He'd promised, and then stopped. That can wait, he'd told Mara each time she gently reminded him. Everything can wait. On his way out, the head of building services, a woman named Ruby Alvarez with kind eyes and stubborn shoulders, intercepted him, cradling a carton of replacement bulbs. "Mr. Cole, your driver said you didn't want pickups anymore. Should I return the account?" "I'm walking," Nathan said. The rain had softened to a mist that made the city seem deliberate. "And keep the account. Things may change." Ruby hesitated. "My cousin volunteers at the Green Lake Community Collaborative. They said Mrs. Cole was helping with a project there. If you're headed that way, sir, it might be something you'd want to see." Nathan's spine prickled. "What project?" Ruby shrugged. "Not my place. She was excited. Said it would make you proud and mad at the same time." A sympathetic smile. The good kind of mad. He left before his face could betray him. Pride and anger had always waltzed through his marriage like mismatched partners, her big-hearted risks against his guarded calculus. At Green Lake, he cut across the grass past picnickers and toddlers in rain boots. The water wore a pewter sheen, ducks stitching tiny paths across it. The boathouse smelled like wet wood and borrowed summers. At their table, second from the window, the one where sunlight broke on his coffee and turned it bronze, a woman in a bright yellow raincoat sat waiting. Young, early 20s maybe, with a hurricane of curls and a canvas backpack hugged to her chest. When she saw Nathan approaching, she stood too quickly, nervous hand knocking a sugar packet to the floor. "Mr. Cole?" she asked, voice breathy. "I'm Tasha Ward. Evelyn said you'd come even if you hated that you did." Nathan stopped, half inside, half out of the doorway, like a man deciding whether to step back into his house after smelling smoke. "You knew my wife." Tasha nodded, eyes glistening. "She knew me the way nobody ever has. She told me if you showed up, I'd finally get to tell you what she couldn't finish." She swallowed. "And if you didn't, I was supposed to wait anyway. He always comes through," she said. "Even when it looks like he won't." He sat down across from this stranger who already knew too much, the lake behind her shoulders like an unblinking witness. "All right," he said. "Tell me why my late wife put a stranger on my calendar." Tasha opened the backpack with trembling fingers and pulled out a thick folder sealed with twine. On the front, in Evelyn's neat, angled handwriting, were 4 words that rearranged the architecture of his refusal. "For the children's home." Tasha set the folder gently between them. Like a newborn, neither of them knew how to hold yet. "She began something," she said, voice steadying, "and she promised you'd finish it. And you won't believe what happened next." "She began something," Tasha had said, pushing the twine-tied folder across the table. "And she promised you'd finish it." The words hung between them like mist, delicate and inescapable. Nathan rested his palm on the folder without opening it. as if testing the heat of a door before stepping through. Outside, a pair of teenagers in hoodies drifted a rented rowboat into a lazy circle, oars skimming ripples that broke and healed in the same breath. Inside, the boathouse coffee machine hissed and settled. "Tell me what this is," he said, voice measured, eyes not. Tasha cleared her throat. "It's the Green Lake Children's Home. Not an orphanage." Evelyn hated that word. A transitional campus, housing, counseling, legal help, tutoring, the works. For kids aging out of foster care so they don't end up couch surfing or worse. She glanced toward the water. "She said you like things explained in layers, so she made layers." She nudged the folder again. "Open it." He loosened the twine and unfolded the first tab. Evelyn's handwriting met him like a familiar scent. Block letters for titles, looping commentary in the margins. A site plan, 3 modest buildings forming a U around a garden. A note in the corner read, "Nate, sightlines, safety without feeling watched." He inhaled once, carefully. The next sheet was a budget, a third, a list of partners, a community clinic, a pro bono law firm, the Green Lake Community Collaborative, Ruby's Cousins Group. Beneath them, a neat rectangle of stark text, option agreement, parcel 47B, North Shore. "An option?" Nathan asked, practical brain leaping ahead. "She secured land." Tasha's mouth quirked into an exhausted, proud smile. "She did. 6 months before she got sick. The owner's a retired contractor named Leo. He gave her a sweetheart price if we could close by a date." She turned a page, tapped, October 31st. Nathan felt the date land inside him with a metallic click. Today was Friday. October 31st was a week away. His grief had made days elastic. Now time snapped back into shape and stung. "That's impossible," he said automatically. "Permits, environmental review, zoning." "She did the front work," Tasha interrupted softly, but without apology. She had a way of looking at him that said she'd learned to tell the truth quickly, or not at all. "There's a pre-approval letter from the city. We need to fund escrow and submit final docs. The rest can follow. Leo's old school. If we miss the date, he promised the land to a developer who wants luxury condos." Her throat tightened. Evelyn said missing would break a promise bigger than marriage vows. He flipped another tab. Photos spilled out. Evelyn in a hard hat, laughing with a cluster of teens in matching volunteer t-shirts. Evelyn crouched by a raised garden bed, dirt under her fingernails. Evelyn on a plastic folding chair listening, chin in her hand, to a boy with haunted eyes and a cracked skateboard balanced across his knees. In each picture, his wife looked like a person standing in her calling, not just her clothes. A slim envelope slid free and landed in his lap. On it, in Evelyn's pen, "For when he calls me stubborn," he didn't open it. He already knew. He had called her that the night she showed him the first renderings, told her the foundation could fund scholarships or scale safer initiatives, not build a mini-city on a whim. She'd kissed his forehead as if to bless his fear and said, "If home isn't where risk and love meet, it's just walls." Nathan shut his eyes. The words found him as if they'd been waiting. When he opened them, Tasha had produced a second folder, thinner. "This is me," she said. "Case file. I asked the county for my record so I could show you why this matters. You don't have to read everything, just this page." She flipped to a photocopied incident report. "I aged out at 18. 3 months later, I was sleeping behind the laundromat and skipping community college orientation because I couldn't figure out forms. Evelyn found me at the collaborative. She sat with me for 3 hours and filled out the FAFSA like it was a love letter. Then she said, 'You're not a project, Tasha. You're a neighbor. Neighbors deserve keys.'" He frowned, the edge of skepticism dulling under the weight of her clarity. "Evelyn never told me about you." Tasha swallowed. "She said she wanted to protect you from her hope until she had something you could hold. She knew how grief and spreadsheets fight in your body. After a beat, "I'm not asking for money I can stash, Mr. Cole. I'm asking for a door kids can walk through without earning it first." Silence pooled. A jogger thudded past the window, ponytail bouncing like a metronome. Nathan's mind bucked between rows of actuarial logic and a memory of Evelyn bending to tie a child's shoe at a fundraiser, not because cameras watched, but because laces were tangled and she had hands. "We would need a governance structure," he said finally, the language arriving out of habit. "Board oversight, reserves, a sustainability plan. This can't be a monument that collapses when the news cycle moves on." "Evelyn drafted it." Tasha turned to the back. "A starter board, 2 community members, 1 former foster youth, 1 clinician, 1 financial expert. She wanted you as chair for the first year and then to rotate out. She wrote that in ink." Tasha's mouth twitched. "She even put a note, 'Don't argue, Nathan. I know you like to build and then let fly.'" He almost laughed. Almost. The sound caught behind his sternum like a bright fish. The boathouse door opened. A gust carried in the smell of cedar and wet nylon, and with it, a woman in a charcoal raincoat with the posture of someone who led meetings in her sleep. Mara. She spotted them, exhaled relief, and crossed the room. "You weren't answering," she told Nathan, attention flicking to Tasha with quick assessment. "I figured I'd risk intruding." Tasha stood. "I'm Tasha." "Mara," she replied. "I keep the chaos on his calendar, the manageable kind." Her gaze dipped to the folder, to the option agreement. So it was true. "You knew?" Nathan asked, sharper than intended. Mara didn't flinch. "I knew she was up to something that had dates and witnesses. She asked me for time slots labeled community site and insisted they looked like dentist appointments so you wouldn't reschedule them." A flicker of grief softened her tone. "She wanted to surprise you when it was ready to fly." He bristled, old arguments sparking in the ash. "We don't do surprises with 8-figure liabilities." Tasha's jaw set. "We do them when lives are at stake." Mara lifted a calming palm. "The liability is organized. I scanned the escrow paperwork on my way." From her bag, she produced a manila envelope stamped with the law firm's letterhead. "Kincaid and Stern. There's a cashier's check from a seed pledge Evelyn secured and a draft for the remainder your foundation would need to wire. The firm's partner wrote a note. Per Evelyn's instruction, time sensitive." Nathan stared at his executive assistant, at the young woman who was not shaking anymore, at the envelope that made all of this more than dreamlike intent. The room seemed to tilt. Weeks of numbness rumbled, then cracked, as if grief itself had been waiting for paperwork to assume a shape he could fight or embrace. He found the letter labeled, "For when he calls me stubborn," and slid a finger under the flap. Inside, Evelyn's voice assembled itself into lines. "Nate, you once told me you love me because I make you braver than your spreadsheets permit. I'm asking for bravery on a timeline. I know you think I hid this. I didn't. I grew it in a greenhouse until it could survive your weather. If you are reading this, the frost came early. I am stubborn, yes, but not with you, with despair. We have 7 days to say yes. If you can't, I'll understand. But if you can, bring the coat I love and the pen you use when you sign things that matter. Make me proud and mad at the same time." His hand trembled. He placed the letter flat on the table, as if smoothing it could calm his pulse. When he looked up, Tasha was watching him with an expression he had seen on Evelyn, the hope that respects the possibility of no. "I have a board," he said, defaulting to the last argument left. "They'll say I'm acting out of grief." "Then let them," Mara said, "and tell them you also did the math. We can brief them. Tonight." Before he could answer, a shadow fell across the table. An older man with a carpenter's tan and hands like tools stood near the window, cap in hand. "Mr. Cole?" he asked, eyes slipping to the folder, to Tasha, to Mara. "I'm Leo. The land's mine." I don't like condos blocking the lake for people who can't afford the view. He tipped his cap, rough-hewn courtesy. I told Evelyn I'd give you till the 31st, but the developer moved up his offer. He's dangling a bonus if I sign tomorrow. Tomorrow. Heat flushed Nathan's neck, not anger exactly, but the body's alarm when the cliff edge appears closer than the map indicated. You drove this here now? To push me? Leo shook his head. To look you in the eye. She said you'd want that. He placed a folded copy of the option agreement on the table and tapped a clause with a thick finger. She added this line, right here, says if you sign intent, I can give you a 72-hour extension. Not a lawyer, me, but I keep my word. Nathan leaned over the paper, Evelyn's ink again, her insistence embedded in legalese. He felt something unclench, not relief but room. I need to call a meeting, he said, standing so abruptly his chair skittered. Mara, conference room B at the office in an hour. Board on video. Tasha, he hesitated, then nodded. You come too. You'll speak before me. Tasha blinked. Are you sure? I'm not sure about anything except that Evelyn trusted you, he said, picking up the letter, the option, the envelope, and that, somehow, she put courage on my calendar. He shrugged on the coat she loved, navy wool, worn at the cuffs from years of holding hands, and headed for the door. As he pushed it open, the wind off the lake surged, cool and bracing. Leo called after him, Mr. Cole, one more thing. That developer, he's represented by a name you'll recognize. Nathan paused. Whose? Leo's mouth tightened. Your brother-in-law. But that moment changed everything. Mr. Cole, one more thing. That developer, he's represented by a name you'll recognize. Whose? Your brother-in-law. The syllables followed Nathan up the hill like a pursuing siren. By the time he reached the lobby, his pulse had found a new rhythm, half fear, half velocity. Mara was already in motion, phone in one hand, eyes sweeping the room for variables. Tasha hugged her backpack to her chest but kept up, jaw clenched with purpose. At the security desk, Ruby glanced up and read the weather on Nathan's face. The thunderclouds, the electricity. Conference room B, she said, as if she'd been briefed by the same wind. I'll hold calls. The glass-walled room looked out over the city like a watchtower. Nathan hated it lately. It made success look like altitude, and grief like a fall. Tonight, he let it be a vantage point. The board tiled onto the screen. Eamon Price, the family office's CFO, precise as a metronome. Lila Nguyen, pediatrician and community advocate, warm eyes that missed nothing. David Stern, the law firm partner, his suit a kind of armor, and two more. Phyllis Rhodes, retired judge with a patience that could unwrap lies, and Kenji Ito, tech founder turned philanthropist who preferred numbers to narratives. Nathan, Eamon began. We're sorry about the short notice, but you're not sorrier than I am, Nathan said, and he meant it. He drew a breath. I'll be blunt. Evelyn secured an option on parcel 47B near Green Lake for a transitional housing campus for youth aging out of foster care. We have 7 days to exercise, but a developer is trying to preempt with an offer tomorrow. Evelyn arranged a 72-hour extension if I sign intent tonight. He nodded to the camera. We've got the pre-approvals, partner commitments, a governance plan with rotation, seed funds pledged. We need to wire the remainder. Eamon blinked. A campus? Nathan, this is logistically ambitious. Lila finished softly, leaning forward. And exactly the intervention that prevents ER visits, psychiatric holds, and street trauma. I've been begging for this for years. You're telling me Evelyn did it. She began it, Nathan said. He gestured to Tasha, and she asked me to listen to voices like hers before I listened to my fear. Tasha, please. Tasha stood at the end of the table, palms flat as if steadying herself on a deck. I aged out at 18. I had a bag of clothes and a bus card. You don't know what a lease looks like at 18. You don't know how to ask for time off to go to court when your caseworker quits. You don't know that grief is a full-time job and that hunger is louder than homework. She swallowed. Evelyn met me when I was dodging eye contact in a church basement because I'd lost count of kindnesses I couldn't repay. She told me home wasn't something I had to deserve. She made a map and said, "We can build this. We just have to say yes in time." Her voice steadied. You all know Nathan as a man who hits targets. I'm asking you to let him miss one fear and hit this instead. Silence. Eamon's pen tapped once, twice. Our reserves are designed to weather market shocks, he said, not emotional storms. Lila's gaze sharpened. Eamon, there's actuarial data that supports this. For every dollar invested in stable housing for youth exiting care, municipalities save multiple dollars in healthcare and justice systems. I can send citations. Phyllis tilted her head. What about the developer? Who are we up against? Nathan's mouth was dry. Miles Hart. Lila's eyebrows pinched. Evelyn's sister's husband. Nathan nodded once. We haven't been close since he stopped. The history was a room he rarely entered. Miles had always been a sharp dresser and a sharper opportunist, with a talent for making philanthropy a backdrop to his self-portrait. After Evelyn's diagnosis, he'd offered help that felt like a bill. After the funeral, he'd sent lilies and a text that read, "She'd want you to move on, buddy, buddy." Nathan had blocked the number. Kenji glanced off screen, then back. He builds luxury glass boxes with valet dog spas. He'll promise a sliver of affordability and name a plaza after your wife. David cleared his throat. I just received an email. He scanned. From Hart Development's counsel, Miles himself CC'd. They're alleging our option is void due to a misfiled notice. It's aggressive. Mara's eyes flashed. He's bluffing. I saw the stamped acceptance. We have the clerk's acknowledgement. Even if he's bluffing, Eamon said, we must assume a media fight. Widower rushes pet project in wife's name. Our reputation is part of the calculus. Nathan felt the old iron door in his chest swing on its hinges. He could keep it closed, enter a statement, stall behind processes, let October 31 pass and call it fate, or he could let it open and risk everything it would flood. He looked at Evelyn's letter on the table, its edges softening from the oils on his skin. He looked at Tasha, at the barely disguised fear that people like him always found a reason to say no that sounded like a reason to care. He looked at Mara, whose competence buffered his worst instincts daily. Then he raised his chin. David, he said, send confirmation of the filed notice and the clerk's stamp. Reply all. Lila, prepare your data and a narrative for the board memo. Short, sharp, grounded. Kenji, model the worst-case draw on reserves and runway with and without the campaign. Evelyn lined up. Eamon, you and I will go line by line on escrow and the governance plan to make certain we're not building a monument that collapses. He turned to the screen. I'm chair. I'm calling for a vote to sign intent and wire escrow contingent on due diligence that closes the gaps by Sunday night. Eamon's mouth opened, closed. Nathan. I know, Nathan said. His voice softened, not with apology, but with clarity. I know I am grieving. I also know she did the work, and I know what happens if we pretend we need one more week. He exhaled. We lose both the land and whatever self-respect we keep writing checks on. Phyllis lifted a hand. Call the question, Lila. Aye. Kenji hesitated, then nodded. Aye, with the modelling caveat. Phyllis. Aye. Eamon stared at Nathan through the screen as if measuring whether the man he trusted with numbers could be trusted with a leap. Abstain, he said finally. I want to see the models first. David. Aye. With council review immediately. 4 in favour. 1 abstention. The motion carried. Nathan's breath left him like a held note finally released. He signed the letter of intent with the pen he used for documents that changed trajectories. Mara scanned and sent, fingers moving with an urgency that looked like relief. Tasha didn't cheer. She closed her eyes and whispered something that sounded like thank you to a person not in the room. Before the relief could settle into seats, Nathan's phone buzzed. Unknown caller. He let it ring to voicemail, watched the notification pop up, then pressed play. Miles's voice slid into the room like oil on polished wood. "Nate, it's Miles. Look, family first, right? I'm at Leo's shop with a very attractive bridge offer that keeps everyone happy. We put in a boutique, mixed use with, wait for it, 5% below market units. Name the courtyard after Evie, and you get a commemorative plaque. No ugly press battles. I'd hate for investors to think grief made you sloppy. Call me back." Tasha's eyes flashed. "He called her Evie," she said, as if he'd tried to rename a mountain. Nathan felt heat rise, not uncontrolled rage, but a dawning protectiveness that had slept while he was busy being numb. "David," he said calmly, "if he misrepresents our filings to the clerk, we push back. If he tries to pressure Leo, we show the extension clause." He looked at the letter again. "We don't negotiate memorials with people who want to sell views of the lake to the highest bidder." Mara's laptop chimed. "Incoming email," she said, her eyes widened. "From Evelyn's account, another delayed send." Nathan steadied himself, thumb hovering, then opened it. The subject line read, "For the day you say yes." Inside, a single paragraph. "Nate, if you're reading this, you chose courage. Here is the piece I couldn't tell you because I knew you'd try to carry it alone. Your sister, Claire, co-signed Leo's philanthropic pledge. She believes in this more than she believes in holiday civility with Miles. She'll take his fire so you can keep yours for the work. Call her. She's braver than you remember." Nathan's throat tightened. He hadn't spoken to Claire since the funeral, when grief rearranged the furniture of their family and everyone kept bumping into it in the dark. He looked at Mara. "Get Claire on." Mara dialed. The screen split and filled with Claire's face. Tired, freckled, hair shoved into a messy knot. When she saw Nathan, her mouth trembled, then steadied. "Hey, big brother." "Claire," he said, and the name was a bridge he'd forgotten could hold weight. "Did you—" "I did," she said, chin lifting with a glint that reminded him of childhood conspiracies. "He thinks I don't know what he does with our name. He's wrong. I'm ready for the fight." What she said next left everyone speechless. "Hey, big brother. He thinks I don't know what he does with our name. He's wrong. I'm ready for the fight." What she said next left everyone speechless. "I served Miles separation papers this morning," Claire said, voice steady as steel cable. "He can't use me as his shield anymore. And before he tries to bury Leo in filings, I went to the county clerk. I have a sworn affidavit that our option was stamped and indexed. He can swing at air, but there's nothing to hit." The air left the room like a held breath finally exhaled. Nathan's hands trembled on the tabletop. Something in his chest unlatched, a brother-sister hinge quietly oiled. "Claire, why didn't you tell me?" "Because every conversation since the funeral felt like walking on a lake in March," she said, eyes glistening. "Thin ice everywhere. Evie asked me, months ago, to be the one who ignites when you go cold. She knew you'd close the door. She asked me to knock." Mara angled her screen to show the affidavit already in her inbox. "We're covered on the option," she said. "That buys us moral clarity. Legal will still be ugly." David adjusted his glasses. "I'll prepare a restraining letter. If heart development continues to interfere, we'll seek injunctive relief." He paused. "But be prepared for the mirror image. He'll try to freeze us with a TRO." "Let him try," Lila murmured. "We have community on our side." "Then we take this offline," Nathan said, making a decision that felt like stepping onto firm land. "Claire, thank you. Stay safe. Don't answer his calls tonight." He swallowed. "And Thank you for telling me the truth. Her mouth softened. Do what she asked, Nate. Build the door. She ended the call before tears outpaced composure. They broke like a pit crew. Eamon and Kenji moved to a side screen to run models. David drafted filings. Lila compiled citations and testimony. Mara stood at Nathan's elbow, feeding him documents like oxygen. Tasha hovered, then busied herself with practicalities. A list of youth who could safely testify, a pledge sheet, a sign-up for neighbors who wanted to fight condos with more than tweets. By 9, the intent was countersigned, the 72-hour extension executed, and escrow instructions wired. Leo texted a thumbs-up emoji, followed by a photo of his calloused hand on the dotted line. Nathan stared at the image, unexpected gratitude stinging behind his eyes. I should go see the land, he said. He needed earth under his shoes, not just paper under his pen. Mara grabbed her coat. I'm coming. So am I, Tasha said, slinging on her backpack. I want to see where kids will sleep without watching the door. Night in Seattle made Green Lake a mirror, shivering with city light. Parcel 47B sat 2 blocks off the water, a rectangle of gravel and stubborn grass, chain link sagging like a tired eyelid. Someone had spray-painted orange lines where future foundations might pour. On the far corner, a glossy sign had been planted at a cocky angle. Hart Development. Luxury residences coming 2027. He moves fast, Mara muttered. He moves loud, Tasha corrected. Fast would have been buying Leo's promise a year ago. They stepped through the gap where the chain-link gate stuck. The ground smelled like wet stone and possibility. Nathan saw it as Evelyn had sketched it, 3 buildings curling around a garden, light in the windows like warm punctuation. He pictured kids arguing about microwave burritos and algebra, a staffer reminding someone to drink water, a girl laughing without checking who was listening. The image hit him with a startling physicality. He pressed his palm to the cold fence post and felt, for the first time since the funeral, warmth travel back into his hand. Headlights washed over the lot. A black SUV slid to a stop in a wash of gravel, and out stepped Miles Hart in a camel coat and perfect hair, 2 men with tripods tumbling after him. A camera blinked red. "Nate!" he called, arms spread like they were about to hug. "Little late-night tour." Mara's eyes flicked to the camera, then to Nathan. "Be careful." Miles wore a grin like a weapon. "I brought my community outreach team," he said, indicating the lens. "Transparency, you know. I thought the public should see how the Cole Foundation makes decisions, alone, in the dark, trespassing." Tasha stepped forward before Nathan could. "This land isn't yours," she said, voice flat. "If you're lost, the lake's 2 blocks that way." Miles didn't even glance at her. "And who's this? A paid actress. Cute backpack." He angled his face to camera. "We all want what's best for the neighborhood. My plan brings jobs and tax base. Nathan wants to warehouse troubled youth." "They're neighbors," Nathan said, tone surgical. He gestured to the sign. "Pull that down. You have no right to plant a lie." Miles's smile thinned. "Lawyers can argue about notice and rights. The public will decide about optics. Grieving widower Rush's pet project risks foundation." I can already see the headline. Mara's voice cut in, measured. "The clerk's affidavit is filed. We have video too. If you slander the youth who'll live here, we will introduce you to every camera in the city." Everything in Nathan wanted to meet force with force. He could feel the coil of anger that had lived under his ribs since the diagnosis, since the funeral lilies wilted. But Evelyn's letter sat like a hand on his shoulder, steadying. He turned to the camera. "Evelyn fought statistics with names," he said quietly. "There will be rooms here, lights that turn on, a mailbox with somebody's last name on it. If you don't understand why that matters, I can't help you, but I won't get in a shouting match about it." The cameraman faltered. lens dipping a fraction. Tasha's voice softened, finding marrow. When you age out, birthdays stop meaning cake. They mean eviction. We're building a place where birthdays mean you get to stay. She glanced at Nathan, then back at the lens. Put that on your news crawl. Miles's eyes ticked, calculating new angles. He lifted his phone. Then we'll let the court decide. He texted, thumbs fluttering. By morning, you'll be frozen. He left in a spray of gravel, the glossy sign wobbling in his wake. Nathan's breath smoked in the chill. Tasha hugged herself and stared at the empty lot until the camera's red light dwindled down the block. He'll go for throats, she whispered. Then we wear scarves, Mara said, practical as ever. Let's go home. Tomorrow starts early. They were halfway back to the cars when a sheriff's cruiser turned the corner and idled at the curb. A deputy stepped out, rain beading on his hat brim. He held a stack of papers with the weary carefulness of someone who hated being the messenger. Mr. Cole. Yes. He glanced at Mara and Tasha, then offered the papers to Nathan. Temporary restraining order requested by Heart Development. Hearing set for Monday morning. Until then, you're enjoined from interfering with prospective economic advantage regarding this parcel. No public statements construed as defamatory. No contact with the seller except through counsel. Mara's breath hissed. They're trying to gag us and isolate Leo. The deputy's gaze softened. I don't pick sides. I just hand people envelopes. He tipped his hat and left. Nathan stood in the weak wash of the streetlight, reading the ink that dared him to flinch. The edges cut his skin a little where his grip tightened. Evelyn's appointment on his calendar had become a gauntlet on the pavement. He looked at Tasha. We'll be in court Monday, he said, and on Sunday we'll hold a community meeting under a roof nobody owns. They can try to stop us from speaking here. They can't stop us from telling the truth where the ceiling leaks. Tasha smiled, small and fierce. Church basement, he said, tasting Evelyn's grin in his own mouth. As they walked away, Nathan felt something like a drumbeat underfoot, the city's heart, maybe, or his own returning, with a rhythm he recognized from the life he'd loved with her, not yet defeated, not remotely done. And you won't believe what happened next. They can try to stop us from speaking here. They can't stop us from telling the truth where the ceiling leaks. Church basement, he said, tasting Evelyn's grin in his own mouth. Saturday unfurled like a tightrope. Mara spent the morning turning an injunction into a checklist, her fingers drumming quietly while documents compiled like soldiers. Eamon and Kenji hammered numbers until worst case looked merely difficult. David wrote and rewrote sentences meant to deflect Miles's punch without throwing one back the court could punish. Nathan moved from call to call, a man learning to steer without hiding behind the wheel. Every so often, he'd find his eyes drifting to the corner of his monitor where the calendar entry still pulsed. Final review. It had felt like a haunting on Friday. Now, it felt like a compass. Blair texted updates in terse bursts. I'm okay. He's furious. He'll try the press. I've changed the locks. She sent a photo of a bruised sky over Ballard and wrote, Remember when Evie said Seattle has weather like a moody artist? He almost smiled. By evening, flyers for Sunday's meeting had multiplied across the neighborhood, photocopies with crooked borders taped to cafe windows and barbershop mirrors. Tasha and two other youth, Devon, who spoke softly but landed like a bell, and Tiana, who had a way of telling the truth that made silence feel expensive, hung them with blue tape and nicks on their knuckles. Think anyone will come? Devon asked, eyeing the rain. They'll come because they hate condos, Tiana said. They'll stay because they hear your story. She glanced at Nathan, and because of her name. The basement of Lake City Grace wasn't much. Folding chairs scuffed by years of potlucks, water stains on the drop ceiling like continents on a map, a coffee urn that had seen more secrets than most therapists. Sunday at 5 people started filing in the way rain finds low places, quietly, inevitably. Nurses straight off shifts, a UPS driver in his brown shorts, retirees with knitting needles in their totes, a swim team kid trailing damp footprints, a community organizer with a stack of petitions, the custodian who unlocked the door and shrugged. I like rooms that smell like work. Nathan stood at the back first, letting the room collect him before it claimed him. When he finally moved to the front, he felt the weight of eyes, not suspicion exactly, but expectation braided with grief. He didn't clear his throat or launch into a statement. He held the microphone like a hand you ask before you take. My wife was better at this part, he said, voice steady. She could make a crowded room feel like a porch. He nodded toward Tasha. She believed home is a right you don't earn by surviving. We're asking to build a place where that belief turns on lights. He paused. I know some of you worry about safety, cost, traffic. Those are real. We'll answer. But tonight, I'm asking you to hear names before numbers. He stepped aside. Tasha went first, telling the story of the laundromat and the FAFSA like a bedtime story for adults who had forgotten how to listen. Devon followed, describing the awfulness of a mailbox with no key. Tiana said, in a voice like a line break, some of us learned to leave before we learned to stay. Teach us to stay. Questions rose, some earnest, some wary, a few barbed. A man in a fisherman's cap asked about police calls. Lila stood and answered with data and tenderness in equal measure. A woman worried about property values. Kenji explained how stability does more for neighborhoods than speculation. A shop owner wanted to know who to call when things went wrong. Me, Mara said simply, stepping to the microphone. You call me. I'm the person whose phone is on at 2 a.m. The door opened midstream, cool air rippling the posters tacked to the wall. Miles walked in, flanked by a tidy woman with a tablet and a cameraman humping a tripod. He didn't grandstand this time. He made a beeline for the front row and sat with an expression that practiced humility without learning it. Claire, who had been leaning against the far wall, straightened so fast her hair clip snapped. She didn't move to him. She didn't look away either. Her presence in the corner felt like a lighthouse, steady, unblinking. When the microphone found Miles, because fairness, Nathan insisted on fairness, he put on his community voice. None of us is against helping youth, but large-scale transitional housing without proper oversight can invite crime and despair. My team proposes a mixed-use development with tasteful affordability baked in, plus a donation to a youth mentorship program. It's realistic. It's responsible. A murmur passed through the room. Tasha's mouth tightened, but she didn't interrupt. Nathan watched the faces, not Miles, the way the UPS driver pinched his lips, the way the custodian shook his head once like swatting a fly. When the questions came, they came from them, not him. 5% affordability in a neighborhood where we're already priced out, the barista asked. That's garnish. The swim team kid raised a hand and stated, I want more little brothers and sisters on our lanes, not more valet parking spots. Devon, surprisingly, took the mic back. We don't need mentorship instead of homes, he said. We need mentorship inside homes. Miles's jaw flexed. The camera light blinked. Somewhere near the back, a voice called, What would Evelyn say? It cut clean through rhetoric. Nathan didn't look at Miles. He looked at the water stains on the ceiling and saw the shape of a summer afternoon instead. Evelyn on a sagging couch in a shelter office, laughing as a girl taught her how to tie a headscarf. Evelyn paying attention like it paid wages. She'd say we make decisions that let kids keep keys, he answered softly. She'd say don't call generosity a plan, The pastor, a woman in a cardigan with elbows worn shiny, closed the meeting not with a prayer but with a logistics list. Working groups for zoning letters, a sign-up for court attendance, a casserole train for Leo because he's going to be dragged into this and he deserves lasagna. People lined up to write their names. Someone handed Tasha $50 in crumpled bills and said, "For the garden beds." A teenager asked if he could paint a mural when it opened. "Yes," Nathan said, surprised by the ease of the word. When the room had thinned to a handful, Miles stood. He didn't approach Nathan, he walked to Claire. "We can still settle this," he murmured, forgetting the microphone in Nathan's hand amplified the hush anyway. "You embarrass me, you embarrass you. You embarrass yourself," Claire said calmly. "I'm not your mirror anymore." The cameraman caught the wound of that without understanding its anatomy. Miles turned, lost the smile, and muttered to Nathan as he passed, "Court eats idealists. Bring a bib." The basement emptied. Chairs squealed back into stacks. Nathan gathered flyers and found, under a hymn book on the last row, a white envelope addressed in Evelyn's hand. He felt the room tilt. He opened it at the folding table where someone had spilled sugar. Inside, a thumb drive and a single line. "For Monday morning, in case his voice gets louder than yours." Mara's breath caught. "What is it?" "A video," he said, knowing before proof. "She made a video." They didn't watch it in the church. They took it to the office where the building hummed like a boat at anchor. David and Lila joined by video, faces small in squares. Nathan slid the drive in. The screen stuttered, then resolved into the kitchen he hadn't been able to enter since the funeral. Tile he'd chosen because she said it made sunlight behave. Mugs she refused to match. A lemon in a bowl because she liked the way yellow startled a room. Evelyn sat at the table in a sweater he could still find blindfolded, her hair scarfed, her eyes enormous with light. "Hi, Nate," she said, as if she were late for dinner. "Hi, everyone who loves him enough to argue with him." He stood very still. No one spoke. On the screen, Evelyn folded her hands and began to speak. About the kids, about the city, about the numbers and the names, about fear and doors, and how love is not a ledger, but it balances anyway. She spoke directly to a judge she'd never meet, and to a man she'd known better than he knew himself. The video clock ticked at the bottom corner, its numbers like a metronome for a heart that was learning a new song. When she paused and lifted her eyes, the room around the screen held its breath. And then she said something that changed the fight entirely. The video clock ticked at the bottom corner, its numbers like a metronome for a heart that was learning a new song. When she paused and lifted her eyes, the room around the screen held its breath. And then she said something that changed the fight entirely. "Judge," Evelyn said into the camera, steady, unhurried, like she was explaining a recipe. "If this is playing, I'm likely not in your courtroom. I wish I were. I like rooms where truth is asked to take an oath. The youths we're housing are already under oath to a life they didn't choose. We're just promising them a place to keep their word." She reached off-screen, slid a thin binder into view, the corners smudged by use. "This is the Green Lake Covenant. It's a community land trust instrument I drafted with Kincaid and Stern. Parcel 47B is to be deeded to the trust upon closing. No resale, no luxury conversion, no bait and switch, only non-profit housing and services in perpetuity. I asked Leo to sign an intent to that effect. He did." She smiled, small and fierce. "He said he's tired of seeing people priced out of the views they grew up with." Mara exhaled like she'd been underwater. David leaned into his webcam, eyes bright. "She built a wall no condo can climb." Evelyn's hands folded again. "You'll hear arguments about haste. We were not hasty. We were timely. There's a difference. Haste panics. Timeliness prepares. We sought pre-approvals, lined up partners, modeled cash flow, invited oversight. The urgency is not a whim. It's a birthday on a calendar that moves kids onto a sidewalk. She looked past the lens as if she could see Nathan standing in their kitchen doorway. "Nate, there's one more thing." The smile faltered, then steadied. "I pledged a match through my personal trust. If you and the board sign intent, a fund of 5 million unlocks for construction, contingent on the land trust deed. Don't be proud in the wrong direction. Use it." Kenji's breath left him in a low whistle. Eamon's spreadsheet-loving soul actually softened around the edges. "Matching leverage," he murmured. "That changes our runway." Evelyn took a sip from a chipped mug he recognized, blue with a crack like a river. "And because honesty is the cheapest blessing and the most expensive habit, I met with Miles 6 months ago. He offered to partner, his word, if we softened the covenant and added mixed-use retail. When I declined, he sent an email from his acquisitions director promising a generous personal honorarium if I would persuade our board to let Hart Development lead. I forwarded it to David and to myself under the subject line, 'Temptation is bad at spelling.' It's in the file." She tilted her head. "Miles, if you're watching, I wish you the kind of success that lets you sleep. This isn't that." Tasha made a sound that was half laugh, half broken hallelujah. Nathan couldn't breathe for a beat. Then breath returned like surf. The video didn't end with scolding. It ended with tenderness. "Nate," Evelyn said, softer now. "I scheduled a meeting because I knew you'd keep appointments even when your heart refused visitors. This is the last one I could put on your calendar. When you leave court, take the long way home around the lake. Sit by the boathouse. Count the lights on the water and pretend they're all rooms we opened. If it hurts, let it hurt in the right place." She lifted her palm to the camera as if to press it to his. "I love the coat you're wearing. Bring a pen." The screen went black. In the silence that followed, the building seemed to change its mind about humming and began to breathe instead. Nathan swiped at his eyes with the heel of his hand and found, to his surprise, that the motion didn't end in shame. "We use it all," he said. "Covenant, match, the email." He looked at David. "We file a sworn declaration attaching the covenant and the match. We let the judge see we're not sprinting. We're arriving." Monday morning draped itself in courthouse marble and fluorescent light. King County Superior Court, Department 12. The pews were full, neighbors from the basement meeting. A row of social workers in sensible shoes, 2 teachers on their prep periods, Leo in his only suit, Claire with a jaw like a drawbridge, Tasha sandwiched between Mara and Lila. On the other side, Miles with his counsel, his tie the color of carefully muted ambition. Cameras waited in the hallway. The judge had banned them in the room. Good. Judge Alvarez, no relation to Ruby, though Nathan couldn't help the jolt at the name, took the bench with the air of someone allergic to theater. "We're here on Hart Development v. Cole Foundation, temporary restraining order, counsel, you know my rules." "Keep to the point." Miles's lawyer, a man with silver temples and a gift for sounding reasonable, began. "Your Honor, this is a textbook case of tortious interference. My client had a legitimate business expectancy with the landowner, the Cole Foundation, in a burst of emotional decision-making following a personal tragedy, has attempted to forestall a lawful transaction. We're not against charity, we are against chaos." David stood, hands steady. "Your Honor, the only expectancy here is the one documented and recorded, our option, stamped and acknowledged weeks before any offer by Hart. The Foundation's actions are not chaotic. They are the fruition of a plan with governance, pre-approvals, and a land trust covenant that serves the public interest." He held up a document. "We submit the covenant, the clerk's affidavit, and a declaration from Mr. Gonzalez, the landowner, confirming his intent." Judge Alvarez flipped pages, expression unreadable. "And this match?" she asked, tapping the declaration. "It says additional funding is contingent on the covenant." David nodded. "Yes." The donor anticipated the court might wonder about resource sustainability. The judge's gaze slid to Miles. Counsel? Miles's lawyer adjusted his glasses. Conditional funding is vapor, Your Honor. Aspirational. David didn't sit. And yet Mr. Hart's community fund is a press release, not a deposit. We have a cashier's check in escrow and a signed extension executed in accordance with the option. Our speech to our community is not defamation, it is petitioning, classic First Amendment. Miles's mouth tightened. He scribbled a note, slid it to counsel. Counsel cleared his throat. There is also the matter of public safety. Transitional housing, while noble, can destabilize neighborhoods if sited without. Lila stood from the pews at Nathan's nod. David gestured. With the court's permission, Dr. Nguyen can address that point briefly. She's a pediatrician and community health advocate. The judge lifted a hand. 2 minutes. Lila's voice fit the room like it had been measured for it. Unstable housing is what destabilizes neighborhoods. ER utilization skyrockets. Law enforcement gets shoehorned into social work. Kids sleep in cars. A staffed transitional campus reduces harm calls and increases school attendance. We're not asking the court to solve policy. We're asking not to be gagged while we do legal, boring, desperately needed work. A murmur rippled. Judge Alvarez held up a palm. Quiet, settled like dust. She turned to Nathan. Mr. Cole, would you like to speak? He hadn't planned to. He also hadn't planned to bury his wife or to carry a covenant in his pocket like a talisman. He stood, felt the weight of the room, and remembered Evelyn's instruction. Sit by the water. Count the lights. Your Honor, he began, I used to think love was private. So was grief. This past week taught me both are civic. We're not trying to build a monument to my wife. We're trying to build mailboxes with names no one bothered to learn. We're on time, not in a rush. We're accountable. If you grant this TRO, you won't freeze chaos. You'll freeze a door mid-hinge. For a heartbeat, the only sound was the hum of the HVC. Judge Alvarez looked down, made notes in handwriting that probably terrified clerks. When she looked up, her eyes were gentle in a way that did not weaken her decision. Hart's request for a temporary restraining order is denied, she said. The plaintiff has not shown a likelihood of success on the merits, nor irreparable harm from allowing the optionee to proceed under an existing option. Speech by the Foundation appears protected. I will set a prompt case schedule on any remaining declaratory relief. But in the meantime, talk to each other like the city depends on it, because it does. Miles's jaw flexed. Claire exhaled a breath that looked a lot like emancipation. Tasha squeezed Mara's hand so hard, both winced and didn't complain. Leo's shoulders dropped an inch, then another. He looked like sleep might finally find him. Outside, cameras pounced. Nathan said only what he had come to believe. We're grateful. We're ready to work. He declined to comment on Miles. He refused to use Evelyn's name as a shield and used it instead as a lantern. Back at the office, the elevator doors opened on applause that embarrassed him into smiling. Ruby handed him a Tupperware labeled chicken enchiladas, Leo's wife. Court runs on casseroles, she said. On his desk, his phone buzzed. A calendar reminder glowed. Final review, 7 p.m. Green Lake Boathouse. He had kept the appointment without knowing. Another reminder bloomed beneath it, one he hadn't seen before, nested in the week like a secret. Sunset Walk, rooftop, Tuesday, 6:41 p.m. He didn't create it. He knew who did. Tomorrow, he whispered to the empty office that didn't feel empty, I'll take the long way home. But that moment changed everything. On his desk, his phone buzzed. A calendar reminder glowed. Final review, 7 p.m., Green Lake Boathouse. He had kept the appointment without knowing. Another reminder bloomed beneath it. one he hadn't seen before, nested in the week like a secret, sunset walk. Rooftop, Tuesday, 6:41 p.m. He didn't create it. He knew who did. Tomorrow, he whispered to the empty office that didn't feel empty, I'll take the long way home. The city felt newly legible the next morning, as if someone had adjusted the contrast on Nathan's life. Headlines muttered in the periphery. Court denies Hartrow. Community plan advances. But he let other voices carry the noise. He spent the day with the quiet work of beginnings, signing the land trust deed draft, meeting with the city planner who had a stamp that looked like a small, benevolent hammer, walking the lot with Leo while they argued about trees like old men in a park. "Maples!" Leo insisted. "They know how to stay!" Nathan countered with cedars. They settled on both, a small treaty that pleased them more than it should have. Claire came by with paper cups of soup and the shaky calm of a person who had moved her furniture and found the floor underneath. "He's fired 3 PR firms since yesterday," she said, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "He'll pivot to charm. Don't mistake it for a truce." "I won't," Nathan promised. He hesitated, the old habit of swallowing tenderness nudging his ribs. "You were incredible." Claire's mouth softened. "Evie left me a list too," she admitted, smiling through tears. "Rules for loving you when you're impossible. Item 1. Make him eat when he thinks thinking is food." She pushed a bag across the desk. Muffins. Lemon, Evelyn's favorite. The citrus note jumped into the room like a small sun. By late afternoon, the Foundation's lobby was crowded with volunteers sorting donated laptops, bedding and books into labelled bins. Tasha moved through the chaos with a clipboard and that backpack like a second spine. She traded trembling for something steadier, a hum under her skin. At one table, a retired teacher evaluated textbooks with the solemnity of a judge. At another, the UPS driver from the meeting, name tag Ramon, organized extension cords into tamed coils. "If kids can't charge things," he said, "hope dies at 3%. At 6:20, Mara tapped her watch. "Your calendar has a line written by a woman who always meant what she wrote." He could have brought the whole office. Instead, he climbed alone. The rooftop had been a vanity once, a hedge maze of modern planter boxes and a bar that did more for the skyline than for anyone's thirst. Tonight, it was a place where the light poured itself over Seattle like warm tea. The air smelled faintly of rosemary from a pot someone had forgotten to kill. The sun flattened itself against the Olympic mountains and split into gold and rose. And for a long heartbeat, Nathan didn't move, didn't speak, didn't pretend. At exactly 6:41, a string of Edison bulbs along the railing blinked to life. He frowned, stepped closer, and found a small brass key taped beneath the first bulb with painter's tape. Evelyn's tape. The bright blue kind she used to mark walls she wanted to paint someday. Attached to the key, a tag. Planter Box B, lift gently. His hands went careful all on their own. Beneath the rosemary, a shallow compartment revealed itself, and inside, a narrow envelope with his name and a second, thicker one labelled, "For the day you look west, at last." He opened the narrow one first. "Nate, if you're here, it's because the day shoved you toward it. You always face east. Numbers, mornings, forecasts. Tonight, look west. Let the sun leave and keep standing anyway. I hid one mercy up here. It's not a test, it's a permission slip. Under the second envelope is a ring box. Inside is my wedding band. I took it off when treatment made my hands strange. I kept it near the rosemary, because you said the plant smells like holidays. If you're ready, put it in your pocket. Not to hold on, though you can, but to carry forward. Also, don't be alone unless alone is what you need. If Mara shows up, forgive me. I texted her to check on you at 6:50. I worried less if she kept worrying. He laughed, the sound startling and bright in the open air. He lifted the second envelope, but not the ring box yet. The second letter was longer, written in the darkness silver ink Evelyn liked. She had drawn a tiny map of the rooftop in the margin, an arrow to a bench. Sit here. The wind is kinder. She wrote about the first time she'd dragged him up here to watch a meteor shower, about how he'd tried to calculate velocity while she'd tried to name the stars. Both were love, she wrote. Both were our way of not wasting time. Footsteps padded behind him. Mara emerged from the stairwell, breath a little quick, cheeks flushed from the climb. I got a text 8 minutes ago that said, "Don't scold him into feeling. Sit beside him until silence gets soft." She lifted her phone. Guess who? Nathan held up the letter like a found photograph. She keeps keeping time. They sat on the bench Evelyn had sketched. The sun slipped, the sky bruised, then mended, and the first city lights pricked on. Small, declarative. For a stretch, they said nothing. Finally, Mara spoke. I think grief is a kind of citizenship. You don't apply for it. But if you're lucky, you live somewhere that teaches you how to vote with your days. He nodded, throat thick. She asked me to count the lights, pretend they're rooms we opened. He began quietly. 1, 2, 3. Mara joined him, voice a soft second line. By 47, he could breathe without the bruise catching. By 90 DAS, he could imagine the buildings at Parcel 47B lit like this, steady, unremarkable, miracle. At 96, his phone vibrated. A message from an unknown number. A photo attached. A glossy rendering of a luxury tower and a caption. Last offer. Walk away and I go quiet. Keep going and I show the world every time your company cut corners. The number was Miles's, though he had masked it with an app that thought it could make threats wear disguises. Nathan stared at the screen until the anger rose, and as curiously didn't poison him. We didn't cut corners, he said. We filed extensions. We paid vendors on time. We warned shareholders when storms were coming. He thinks we live where he lives. Then let him send it, Mara said, steady as a metronome. Truth can take a punch. Nathan slid the phone away and, with deliberate care, lifted the ring from the hidden compartment. The band was warm from the wood, as if it had waited in sunlight. He didn't put it on. He pressed it into his palm, felt its circle leave a soft imprint, then slipped it into his coat pocket with the same instinct that tucks a photograph into a wallet, near, not chaining. Tomorrow, Mara said, we meet with the architect. She bumped his shoulder. And I need you to pick between maple and cedar again. Both, he said. We'll make the budget like a good soup. They watched the city finish becoming night. When they finally stood, Nathan looked west as instructed. The horizon had lost the sun but kept its heat. He put the envelope back in the planter, took the key, and locked the compartment not out of secrecy but out of gratitude. As they crossed to the stairwell, his phone buzzed again. Claire. He's on the news. He's smiling like a forgiveness he didn't earn. He's hinting at ethical questions at Cole Logistics. Call me when you can. Beneath it, a second text. From an unknown, check your inbox. Anonymous tip. He opened his email. A message waited with no subject, and one attachment. Heart offers. PDF. Inside, a thread of emails. Miles's acquisition director. The honorarium offer to Evelyn in thrumming detail, and a second, uglier offer made 2 months later to a city clerk. Expedite or be replaced. There were screenshots, IP traces, a note. He threatened the wrong intern. Mara leaned over his shoulder, eyes widening. This isn't just leverage, she whispered. It's a confession with stationery. We don't leak, Nathan said, surprising even himself with the calm. We file, we hand it to the people whose job it is to keep rooms honest. He looked at the city laid out like a patient old friend. And we keep building. They descended the stairs lighter than they had climbed them. At the lobby, Ruby waved them over. "A woman dropped this off," she said, producing a shoebox tied with twine. "Said it belonged to Evelyn, said it knows where it's going." Inside, resting on tissue paper, was a door knocker shaped like a small, open hand. Beneath it, another note in Evelyn's looping script for the first door. "Let it be loud enough to wake the tired and kind enough not to frighten." Nathan closed the lid and hugged it like an awkward, perfect child. "We'll mount it ourselves," he said to Mara. Already picturing the front entrance at Parcel 47B, the hand raised in a perpetual hello. Outside, the night had turned the lake into a dark sheet, the city a constellation. Nathan slid his hands into his coat pockets and felt the ring, the key, the weight of a door knocker waiting for wood. He thought he heard. No, he didn't chase it. He let it sit. The echo of Evelyn's laugh carried on some cross-current of memory and air. "And tomorrow?" Mara asked. "Tomorrow we plant stakes," he said, "and we tell the kids the move-in date we're aiming for." "Isn't that dangerous?" she asked. "To promise a timeline when the world loves to rain on calendars," he smiled, a new shape on an old face. "We're not promising certainty," he said. "We're promising a direction." In the elevator's mirrored wall, his reflection looked like a man who had learned that grief isn't a room you live in. It's a landscape you learn to navigate, with maps drawn by people who loved you enough to leave instructions. The doors opened, and the future, imperfect, stubborn, luminous, was on the other side. But that moment changed everything. In the elevator's mirrored wall, his reflection looked like a man who had learned that grief isn't a room you live in. It's a landscape you learn to navigate, with maps drawn by people who loved you enough to leave instructions. The doors opened, and the future, imperfect, stubborn, luminous, was on the other side. But that moment changed everything. It changed the tempo of the week. Permits that had once felt like riddles began to read like recipes. The land trust deed recorded at 9:07 a.m. on Thursday. Leo sent a photo of the clerk's smile as proof that bureaucracy could be human. David filed the packet of heart emails with the ethics office and the DA. He didn't speak to press. He spoke to process. Blair packed 2 suitcases and 3 decades of compromise into a ride share and texted, "I'm safe, I'm free, I'm learning where I end," and he begins. Lila recruited nurses to design a wellness room that smelled like citrus and permission. Kenji negotiated bulk pricing on appliances with the zeal of a man redeeming old algorithms. Eamon, prudent, precise, drafted a cash flow plan that gave the project bones, not just heart. On Friday, the lot ceased to be abstract. Neighbors showed up with gloves and jokes and a playlist no one argued about because there wasn't music, only the bright racket of hammers and the easy percussion of laughter. Tasha arrived early, a clipboard in one hand and a roll of blue painter's tape in the other, ready to label the world into sense. She'd slept with the door knocker on her dresser, she admitted, so the first thing she saw at dawn was an open hand. "It makes waking up feel like answering," she said. Nathan carried the knocker to the framed-in doorway of the community building, where insulation peered like cotton from the ribs of the walls. He lifted the small brass hand and set it against wood that still smelled like forest. "You ready?" he asked. "For the first door," Tasha said, the words a smile and a vow at once. He drove the screws home with slow care. The knocker settled into place and shone. Not garish, not grand, simply certain. Crew members stepped back as if a bell had been rung on a ship. Devon snapped a photo and whispered, "Looks like a hello you can hear." News broke by afternoon that Heart Development was under investigation. The camera caught Miles leaving his office without his grin. Nathan didn't gloat. He called Claire, and they discussed lawyers and boundaries and a family that would have to redraw itself. She asked if she could help paint. "Yes," he said. "Walls, lines, futures." By evening, the sky had the look of a tired bruise easing. They set a date for a soft opening, 90 days, not as a dare but as a direction, just as Nathan had promised. In the meantime, they would host a weekly supper at the church basement for kids waiting on move-in, the practice of home before the address of it. Flyers read like invitations, not summons. Neighbors eat, stories welcome, keys coming. That night, Nathan kept Evelyn's last appointment, Green Lake Boathouse, 7:09 p.m. Not because the calendar told him to, but because her voice still knew his shortcuts. The same table waited, the same window throwing the lake onto the floor like spilled metal. He brought the ring in his pocket and the pen she loved, though he had nothing to sign but air. When Mara arrived with hot chocolate and 2 paper napkins, he didn't protest. They sat where their laughter had once skated, where grief had once anchored like a stone, and neither felt like a betrayal of the other. He opened one more envelope she'd hidden at the bottom of the folder, the one he'd missed because it was thin as a whisper. Final review, truly final. Inside, a single index card, checklist for the day we open. The garden beds have dirt under someone's nails. The mailbox labels are crooked because a kid insisted on writing their own name. The kitchen smells like onions and hope. The door knocker works. You look tired and kind. We did not save everyone. We kept our promise to the ones we met. You take the long way home. He tucked the card back into his coat. Outside, a boy practiced skate tricks on the path, failing and laughing, failing better. You think she knew I'd be happy again? He asked, surprising himself with the nakedness of it. Mara didn't rush. I think she knew happiness would forget sometimes that it owed you rent, she said, and that you'd forgive it. When the supper train launched 2 weeks later, the basement smelled exactly like onions and hope. The casserole line snaked past drawings of the buildings taped to the wall. A teacher corrected a grant proposal between bites of cornbread. A temp agency recruiter collected resumes and handed out pens with the zeal of a magician giving children wands. The custodian who liked rooms that smelled like work taught a girl to use a power drill on scrap wood. The girl taught him to braid friendship bracelets. Devon read aloud the first mail delivered to the project's P.O. box. A postcard from a retired couple in Ohio who'd seen a news clip and wrote, "We don't know you, but we remember the motel we lived in once. Please accept this as a mortgage on the future." It held a check for $37.18 and a note. We wanted it to feel like groceries. Near 7 Tulmos, Tasha stood and tapped a glass. She had something in her hand wrapped in paper. "This is weird," she said, eyes bright, "but I want to give a toast." She peeled the paper back. The ring gleamed, gasps sprouted like dandelions. "Evelyn told me to hold this the night before we hung the knocker," she said, voice steady. "She said it wasn't a relic, it was a relay. It belongs to the place more than to the past." She turned to Nathan. "If you're ready." He caught breath like a ball and didn't drop it. "I am," he said, hearing truth, not performance. He lifted the ring and pressed it deliberately into a shadow gap in the framing by the front door, tucked but not hidden, near the hinge and the light. "Here," he said. "Where promises pivot." Applause broke, not thunderous, but warm, a weather front moving through a room. The knocker answered with a quiet tap, as if granting permission to cheer. They didn't save everyone. That was never the point. They opened doors and learned the names of those who walked through. On move-in day, 91 days after the court hearing, close enough to count, there were crooked mailbox labels and arguments about where to put the spice rack that felt like symphonies. A girl cried because someone handed her a key and didn't ask for a deposit of dignity. A boy left his skateboard by the shoes and didn't check if it would be stolen. Nathan walked the hallway and realized the building didn't belong to him any more than the lake belonged to the richest house on its edge. It belonged to the city and to the kids who would argue about microwave burritos at Tuna May, and to a woman who had written love letters in the margins of legal documents. At dusk, he took the long way home around the water. He counted the lights. He lost count and then kept counting anyway. When he reached the boathouse, he sat on the bench he and Evelyn had once claimed as their two-person front row. The calendar on his phone no longer pulsed at him. The final meeting had been kept. Still, he set a new recurring appointment and smiled at its small audacity. Open the door. Tuesdays, 6:41 p.m. Rooftop, look west. Bring a pen. He put the phone away and let the darkness arrive without rushing to fix it. Grief sat beside him the way a neighbor sits on a porch after a long day, quiet, companionable, not needing to be solved. Across the lake, 3 new windows flicked on in the incomplete buildings, work lights left by an electrician with bad boundaries and a good heart. They looked, to Nathan's unscientific eye, exactly like rooms opening in the future. "Evelyn," he said, into air that felt shared, "I kept the appointment." The water didn't answer. It didn't need to. Somewhere behind him, a door knocker lifted and dropped, a small brass hand saying hello to the night, and he knew he was exactly on time. Thank you for watching. Subscribe, turn on the bell, and tell me if you liked this story.